what I'm philosophically interested in, which is the topic of my research, is the transcendental mechanisms which constitute thought. We know that we're thinking. We know that we're imagining and reasoning and doubting and all of these processes that happen. Now, let's explain the mechanisms that enable this to happen. What must exist in our heads by fiat of being a human, and what moves thought into a creative process. So, how creativity is possible.
Yeah, Lenny, we've always tried to encourage him to incorporate as much color.
Nice.
And try to not have any biases towards.
Yeah, nice.
Even so much so that when he was younger, his favorite color was brown.
Oh,
because
it's my favorite color.
Yeah, no, his favorite color was brown because that was the color you get when you mix all the colors.
Oh, there we go. I like that.
I was like, okay, yeah, man, I like that.
Yes,
I like
yes,
that.
yes, I like
like
that
we were at
indeed.
a party yesterday, a 1-year-old, a first birthday,
Yeah, right.
and they were doing a piñata thing, and they gave the kids bags to go collect the lollies. And so Lenny was given a pink one. At the moment, soft pink is his favorite color.
Oh, great.
So he was taking that, and then we were about to go, and then one of the mums said, "Oh, sorry," took the pink one and then gave him a blue one. I'm like he wants the pink one.
Yes, yeah. It's so fascinating to me, the gendering of anything naturally, but no less color.
Color.
Yeah, it's just
color. It's color, man.
Yeah, I know. I mean, as someone said to me, you don't tell someone they can only have oranges and someone they can only have bananas or apples. It's the same idea.
True. That's true. Even when you look at the history of gendering the colors, you know about that?
Yes,
about
I do. The pink for boys and all
pink
that.
was for
stuff.
boys, yeah, and it was a department store that switched it up because they had excess.
Okay. I didn't know it was a department store.
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe so. If I'm correct in that
Yeah.
they switched it up because they had an excess of one color.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
It's funny how those little contingent factors change the course of history, isn't it?
Completely, and I don't know if there's a way that. No, okay, so normally with fashion and a lot of other cultural influences is the counterculture.
Yes.
It's a way of just going against the grain and wanting to signal your own identity.
Mm-hmm.
But that blue and light blue and pink, it's so strong, strongly
yeah.
ingrained in Western culture. I don't know how we'll be able to switch it up. If anything else, we'll be able to maybe introduce other colors.
Yes.
More gender neutral type colors.
Yeah,
But I don't know about how we'll go about just switching it up entirely.
Well, look, if someone figures it out, I'm happy to endorse them because it's I think we like to latch on to identity markers, and something as, I dare say, superficial as color it's become one of the most prominent ones there are, really.
Especially when there's no other reason. There's nothing that latches the color onto.
No,
At all, right?
And I'm glad you said that fashion is a system, and a system consists of its codes, and all it is being proficient and adept in these codes. So when someone says that blue is in season, blue is not really in season. It's just the code system and the system
Someone
of
just
objects.
said so.
Yeah. And fashion is just the repeated cycles of this process. And of course, the dream is to escape these structures, but they're darn hard to do. So
They are hard. But you find that it's becoming more and more prevalent in culture, where once upon a time there was a staple that you could only get blue jeans, white t-shirt,
yes,
right?
yes,
and
yes,
that was it. That's what everyone wore. And then now we have, well, pretty much just whatever you want.
Oh yeah,
whatever.
and I think I live in the city, and just walking through some of the inner city suburbs, you just go, my God, this is a joyous mishmash of cultural codes.
Yeah, especially in Melbourne,
Yeah.
we do have that. There's a lot of people that when you were saying that coming from Melbourne that we're known for wearing black. Yeah, maybe once upon a time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
maybe once upon a time for sure. But now it's such a motley crew.
Yes, it
And
is.
if you go just a little bit further out of the city, right, like the outskirts, so you're talking about your like Richmond,
Yes, yeah.
Brunswick, and then that's when it,
Yes.
you know, it becomes a bit of a melting pot.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
And one of the big thoughts for me is I'm glad to see, as you said, a motley crew of cultural codes being sort of assembled together like paper mache or something like that.
That's a good way. That's a
But
good way to
then,
explain it.
yeah, and then I think you have to ask, and this is the thing that I'm interested in, is we have tastes, and everyone has a taste. But then when you start asking the question of what constitutes a good taste or a true taste, then you have to start wondering whether it's enough to just be yourself. I think that some of the sort of demands of taste. It's very. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night, mind you. Just
It makes
how
it
all
harder
works.
trying to figure out who, when you say be yourself, because when you think, are you being yourself, are you the antithesis of that?
I like that, and I'm immediately reminded of Oscar Wilde's "Be yourself because everybody else is taken."
Yeah.
I love this phrase. But no, I truly believe that most of the time, and this might be considered cynical, that you are a composite of the things around you, and that's fine. And even the act of rejecting that composite, or rather the codes around you, is still part of the system.
Yeah.
I'm sort of revealing very slowly that the tradition of thinking that I come from is what you'd call structuralism. This idea that things are structurally organized and there are power dynamics but within all of that. And fashion is one of the biggest, most brazen systems there are.
Yeah. It's just the outworldly expression.
Yeah.
In some ways it is. And I think that when you're talking to staying on fashion, if people are following trends, you can also then dissect that and peel the layers back from that. It could be that it's levels of conformity, or even just not even conformity, but not even necessarily caring enough about it when they're just considering fashion is I just need to wear something comfortable.
Yeah.
And then wearing something comfortable, if that's your choice, that's an expression. That's
It is, yes. And I'm repeating myself a lot here, but the point must be stated that even the very act of rejection, rejecting a principle, rejecting the norm, is still going to fall back into a system of meaning.
Yeah.
One can say that they're too cool for something, or they're anarchistic. All of this falls back into a system of
And you
meaning.
could also, it could be even like layers of shame thrown in there, right?
Of course.
there's-
It's everywhere, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Layers of shame. Yes.
Yeah, that there's a lack of confidence of wanting to wear your inner self on the outside, from fear of rejection, fear of what people would think of you, and within your circle of your network, you'll get comfortable in that space, but then you're not comfortable in that space.
Yeah. I think the very nature of, I was using the word codes before, is that codes become also keys into different social strata.
For sure.
Again, I'm just, these are the rudiments of sort of sociological thought, identity, belonging, and the codes that we enact in order to achieve belonging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all want to fit. It goes back to, our probably the primitive mindset of wanting to fit within a community and feeling that need for safety and security and being in amongst peers and like-minded people.
Of course. I think one of the classic ideas in anthropological thought is that, and this is one of my thinkers, Immanuel Kant. He said, humans don't tend to like each other, but they realize that they need each other to progress. So we deal with it.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about, the forming that community and needing each other, that was something a concept that I really played with branding. And how with branding and a lot of people would just immediately just dismiss the power of a brand. But for me, it's absolutely loaded.
Yes,
right?
of course.
If they would just say it's just a T-shirt with a tick. It's like no, you don't understand the power of that tick. You don't.
Yes.
If you really want to think about it, what does that tick represent? What are the values that we have been taught over 50 something years,
Yeah,
right?
nice,
Like it's
nice.
been been a consistent message in the way in their brand, in Nike's brand, right?
Yeah.
Like so there's been so consistently driven about the values and that just do it, right? So it's empowering.
Yes,
And
yes,
it's
yes.
when people brandish that, they want you to know something about them.
Yeah.
And they want you to know that I'm wearing a plain t-shirt with a tick as opposed to a plain t-shirt without a tick.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so there is something to it. And it's signifying, that there's a tribalism in there as well. It's like, I'm wearing this, I am this brand, not that.
Yeah, yeah, nice.
Much like centuries ago, and not even centuries ago, up until today, people would like the religious beliefs, right? Wearing a cross, that's signifying a lot. Right? That's loaded as well.
Yes, it is. Yeah, good.
The families, the coat of arms,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
families,
of course,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
who do you pledge your alliance
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
your allegiance
yeah,
to?
yeah, yeah.
So that's a brand in itself.
For
It
sure,
they all
for
have
sure.
values. They all and it's just modern day.
Yes, yeah, good. I will dare to meta-analyze what you said, which was fascinating to me, and of course it's things that we all understand, sort of innately, not innately, but it's so sort of wrought throughout everyday thinking that it's just the way of life. And what you're doing here, which I love to hear other people do it, is the whole discipline of what we call semiotics, which is the studies of symbols and signs and the fact that they're culturally constructed. And there's this really great text called Mythologies, and this is written in the 50s from a collection of articles. And the author Roland Barthes just pulls apart, wine and milk, steak and chips, Elle magazine, Citroen cars, the world of wrestling, and it's our job, and by our I mean thinkers, the sort of those people within spaces in society who have the privilege to do this, to decode the codes of society. And I like what you say in the sense that you wear the white t-shirt with the tick. There is actually no identity or definition behind that. It is the act of differentiating itself from what it is and is not. So the tick means nothing, but it's because it's not a cross or a circle that it gains its meaning. So that's the sort of idea of a structural system of difference. That's how meaning is gained.
Phenomenology. Give us in a nutshell your study of that and how that impacts. Well, firstly, how does that impact you?
Yeah,
and then how
of
does
course,
that impact us?
Of course. Now, do you mind if I start by defining aesthetics?
Yes, let's do that.
So, one hears the word aesthetic, and without them being wrong, would think of things like art, high culture, the beautiful, the mystical, the sublime, our experience with art. How should we appreciate art or attune ourselves towards the best reception of it and experience of it. All of that's important. But I'm always obliged, just for the sake of proving my point about who I am and what I do, that the word aesthetics comes from the Greek word aesthesis, which means sensation. And this will lead to phenomenology, of course. So I always say to people that, you can engage in philosophy and ask questions about what is being, what is time, what is good, what is justice. But I would always go, that's great. But I think the first question we must ask is, how do we sense the world or engage with the world? And phenomenology helps me here because it's the more general study of how we relate to phenomena. I mean, that's contained in the name. Now, I will say that there are no phenomenologists really agree as to what it means, but that's the joy of it. There have been many French and German thinkers in the tradition, and no less Australian ones. But I would say phenomenology is a concern with our conscious lived experiences. It brackets certain details that may not help us get to the things in themselves. So we don't have to worry about whether what I'm looking at is actually real, or if I'm in a dream, as the famous thought experiment goes, or if I'm simply a brain in a vat as a more later thought experiment goes, or if I'm deceived by a demon, all of these wacky, beautiful philosophical experiments. Phenomenology simply meditates upon the felt lived experience. So it seems an almost efficient maneuver in ways, but there is a truth that exists in this experience. For example, all thought must have intentionality. It must be directed towards an object or something like that. Even if it's an inward thought, you take yourself as the object of thought. And just by using these principles, we can really develop a really great and complex understanding of the world that we exist in. So that's my semi-nutshell definition of phenomenology for you.
So it's just an understanding of every experience that we have, real or not, is going to affect us in one way.
Yes, yes.
And then the way it affects us then is going to determine also then who we are and our contribution and our expression and how it's going to affect everything else around us.
Yeah. So phenomenology is interesting because there have been many thinkers who then take it in the next direction. So there's a really great thinker, Emmanuel Levinas. He was a Lithuanian thinker who mixed phenomenology with ethics, and believed that from this we then have we then form an ethics from phenomenology, how we should act or how we should live. And he would then say, and I won't delve into this too much, that upon the intentional look of the other person's face, we see a whole range of meanings and human experiences that compulse us to act towards them in an appropriate way, to act ethically, in a good sense. Now, this isn't my area, it's simply a fascination. My interest is understanding that the world of the aesthetic, whether it's a separate dimension from the everyday or part of the everyday, and I tend to prefer the former, the latter, the idea that it's ingrained in everyday experiences, that shades, or not shades, but it reveals a different aspect of the human condition. It reveals a different aspect of who we are as people, and it's like an activation that doesn't happen very often. Because when you look at a very, very profound piece of art, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, or a plate of food, or a glass of wine, that really shocks you and surprises you to your core, phenomenologically the experience is distinct.
Yeah,
and that's fascinating to me.
So then we'll be moving into the sublime experiences.
That's the word. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So that's definitely if someone asked me that question in the elevator, who are you? What do you do? I would say I think about the sublime.
The sublime.
Yeah.
I was listening to a Huberman podcast the other day with Robert Greene, and they were talking about the book that he's currently writing, which is on sublime.
Oh, right. Yep.
And I before speaking with you, I didn't really know much about it. You and Isaiah, actually, because he mentioned that word a lot when speaking of his art.
Yes.
And when I was just trying to form that link between what is a sublime experience and how does that relate to art, and it's almost, for me, it's that you could find or enter that subliminal space with everything.
Yes, I would 100% endorse this.
Yeah. With Lenny, when being a 7-year-old, he will be like, I'm bored. Like, dude, if you're bored, just stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
Look out the window, find a thing, find anything.
Yeah, nice.
Study it, analyze it. Dude.
Yeah, nice.
Analyze it, like anything, man. Like you look at, there was a lamppost. Look at that Look at that lamppost, right? It's made out of wood. Where did that come from?
Yeah, nice.
Right? And look at this. Look what it's doing. It's connecting these electrical cables. How is it providing electricity? Where's this coming from? This is incredible stuff, man.
Great. I like this. And this is engaging in phenomenology again. The idea that you intently stare upon something. Not even stare, because that's a visual metaphor, but you perceive something with all of your senses. And after a little while, this is the thought of a really famous French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, very famous existentialist. You stare at something long enough, or something happens, and you feel nausea. I'm not saying Lenny's going to feel nausea, but you sort of get this profound sense of being thrown that you're sort of randomly put onto this earth, and that everything else is randomly put on this earth, and everything's just arranged in a certain way in certain space and time. And so you start feeling this incredible sense of what he would say nausea, the sense that you're shocked by the immediate reality of what's presented in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it could just be a defense mechanism where we do close ourselves off to a lot of that, because it is pretty full on.
I think so.
When you want to break it all down, especially when you're thinking about our right now on Earth, just sitting here having a conversation, and then Earth is revolving around. Then you just extrapolate. You keep on going. Like, that is bonkers.
And that is the classic textbook definition of the sublime. The idea of the mathematical sublime, which is the fact that you can imagine an infinity, and then you can add even more to it, and then you can add even more to it. Just the mind-boggling nature of vastness, of magnitude. That's a classic idea of the sublime.
Yeah, I think there's a limitation to that. I think we can attach a word to it. We call it infinity. We can't really wrap our head around it.
No, we can't.
And so we just accept it as what it is.
Yes.
And and there's the infinite space out there, and then also coming down subatomic infinitely as well.
Yes.
And I think we just accept. We were like, okay, it is what it is.
Yes.
And there's no way we could ever, and thankfully, ever appreciate the magnitude of that. Otherwise, we'll just be stuck pondering everything.
I'd say so. And yes, I mean, the famous French psychoanalyst took up this problem in sort of the 60s and 70s, with the idea that, a subject that is so concerned with this vastness, this sublimity, is essentially a schizophrenic subject, because, of course, where's the meaning in the world if it's all contingent and all that? So it's again, this is the sort of stuff that I glance over, going, oh, but I must live, I must move, so I don't dwell too much on this sort of stuff. But yes.
So a big part and a major area of your study is the aesthetic experience. But also that is attached to the problem with creativity.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you explain that?
Yes. I guess to give an overview of why a philosopher, that is myself, is here right now, is I'm aware that you've engaged with other artists and creatives, and on my way here, I thought to myself, do I qualify as a creative? Now, again, I'm not sure at this point in time. I like to write, I like to cook, all of these creative endeavors. I think everyone lives creatively anyway.
Agreed.
Now, what I'm philosophically interested in, which is the topic of my research, is, and now I'm going to use a few wordy words, but I'll definitely explain them, the transcendental mechanisms which constitute thought. So, as I said before when I was talking about phenomenology, we know that we're thinking, we know that we're imagining and reasoning and doubting and all of these processes that happen. My question, and this is what makes me a transcendental philosopher, is, well, okay, this is happening. Now let's explain the mechanisms that enable this to happen. So what must be happening, what must exist in our heads by fiat of being a human that means that this is happening? And so I lean upon a very, very famous thinker, Immanuel Kant, a very, very famous Prussian thinker from the late 1700s, who argues, for example, that we have three faculties in our active faculties in our minds and in our brains, and that's reason, understanding, and the imagination. So within this very simple schema, and what happens between, think of it like three housemates living in the same house and how they communicate with each other. I use this understanding, that this schema, to understand, well, what makes thought, what moves thought into a creative process. So I'm thinking about how creativity is possible. That's the nature of my research.
Okay, so what would the problem with creativity be? Where are the roadblocks that you find?
Good question. I think it's one of those contradictions in which I accept that creativity is everywhere, and I think most of us are ready to accept this premise. One could say, I guess, I'm interested in the difference between creation versus creativity,
Okay.
And what that means is that creation is a very active manifesting process of creating something physical. But creativity is more of a attunement. It's a state of mind. It's a state of being. And I'm interested in understanding what this means for the human subject and the dynamic in which an object, a figure, will then elicit this creative moment. And it's not an easy question to answer for a number of reasons, which I'm sure I'll elucidate. But that's essentially the main concern of my work.
Yeah, so we want to step back from that and look at how we are the accumulation of all of our experiences. That would play into the creative element. If we have the influence of other people and adversity, challenges in our life, that would cultivate the propensity to be creative.
Sure.
If there is no adversity, if there is no reason to need to be creative, it'll dull that sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that there seems to be a trend in which some of the most amazing thinkers and creatives exist in the world with some sort of troubled existence about them, whether they find themselves against society or against something. It's always funny. I always read the biographies of my favorite thinkers, and they all suffer from headaches or anxiety or problems of this sort of ilk. And I think there is definitely a relation between this. I guess my reply here, if I were to sort of deliver what I think about creativity, I think, yes, we definitely have to accept that our creative practices and our sense of creativity will always be informed by pre-understanding. So our cultural backgrounds, our religion, if we so have one, even a lack of religion counts as something here, ethnicity, all of these classic sort of sociological factors. Our class position is a big one, of course, which mustn't be neglected. All of that is fine, but I do think that there has to be something indeterminate, untraceable, or perhaps traceable, but more like a spectre or a ghost, that element of indeterminable chaos that determines creativity. Yeah, I think creativity must be aligned with chaos.
Why is that?
Well, I could appeal to etymology and what the Greeks would have said, which is the root of cosmetic shares the same root as chaos. I think if you read interviews of artists asking them to try to explain their creative process, you tend to get the same pattern of answers, which is Van Gogh talks about a flash upon high inspiring him, or Pablo Picasso talks about how it took me all my life not to learn how to paint, but to see the world as an infant. And it seems to me that we are, as I mentioned before about my understanding that we are transcendentally built to have certain faculties, we all need to return to our imagination. And the imagination is an unstructured, completely wild dimension, whereas it's the other faculties, reason and understanding, that gives order and conceptual order, mathematical order to the imagination.
There is, for us to be creative, there's an element of doing something that is unreal.
Yes, of course.
Yes. And that would be where the element of chaos would come in. You know, to create is to do something new. And if we are a composition of our experiences, there's nothing new there.
And entirely right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, again, I'm putting on my social sciences hat. This is why class structures are repeated in society. This is why people embody their class habits and things that they've learnt, and then they just repeat the structure for generations. And so it takes these radical and mad moments of genius, and not just an artistic genius, but just genius as a sort of form of thought or a mode of thought, to then escape this this cycle.
Yeah. No, and what you were saying, I think that works in so many levels. You know, when you're talking about that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right?
Yes.
You only know what you know. So how would you even know to look beyond that scope without having to dive into the area of chaos and randomness.
Yes, well, I mean, it's uncomfortable thought, and people don't like being uncomfortable. We tend to avoid pain, or displeasure, I should say, more than just pain. But you can appeal to many thinkers who say that you must become acquainted with displeasure and pain to get to the good bits. But yeah, again, these are questions that sometimes I think about them, and I read the books and I read the articles, old and new, and we don't seem to be going anywhere with them. It's just restating what we already know about class and all these things. Yep.
These are thought exercises. So I came across you when you were working at the perfumery.
Yes.
Stace did a workshop there, took Aluna over there, and she had nothing but great things to say about that.
I'm glad to hear it.
I already had a lot of interest in smell and how it elicits certain areas of memory and of thought, because my area was in branding. So tell us about the work that you're doing with smell and fragrances and how all that links up with everything we've just covered with experiences and how that affects us.
Yes, of course. I'll always try my best. You can approach this question in two ways. On a professional level, I'm a curator and an educator in the world of perfume. Now, I think it's worth stating really quickly that you have to first begin this exercise understanding that perfume is an art form, and it not more than seems, it definitely engages in all the same sort of practices that most forms of traditional and very accepted art forms will engage in. It's compositional. I mean, perfumes think of it like music is a series of notes strung together and harmonized. And then for aesthetic effect, we might create dissonance in a perfume. We might add some note that causes us our hairs on our neck to raise or whatever. So that's the sort of professional side of things for me. I'm interested in education and curation, and I consult in this field. Now, on an academic level, and you can already glean this from what I was saying, there is a militant belief that the senses of taste and smell can elicit these profound aesthetic reactions and experiences.
Absolutely.
And again, it's one of those curious things where if you ask anyone on the street about, if I ask the question, do you think food can make us feel incredible things? Of course, they'll say yes. But it's sort of my goal is to then wade through all of these feelings to get to that one that I call the sublime, which is a surprising, unexpected, something you can't calculate. So my research, just because I love it so much, actually takes wine, which is a very aromatic and tasty beverage, and of course the immense result of great human intervention upon nature, as an object that elicits a sublime experience. So I'm using uncommon mediums, often that have been prejudiced against, to develop my thoughts further.
What do you think it is that, on a societal level, we appreciate visual arts?
Yes.
in all its various forms. Culinary is a big one.
Yes.
As well. Auditory, big one. Touch, there's tactile sensation in everything, and in physical pleasure. Why has smell been so underutilized?
Good. God, there's a lot to say here. My immediate jerk reaction would be to say that, well, because it's invisible. But then again, music is invisible too, in a way. But then if you sort of investigate the sort of history of music, if we appeal to sort of Christian belief, it was our sense of hearing that was most connected to God. So that's why you get that beautiful chamber music and things like that, from my understanding. I wish I could tell you why I feel smell has been neglected in this way, because it's clear to me that smell has not been neglected in every other way. Our noses move into the world. if something is ugly, whether it's an ugly painting on the wall, we don't seem to be. We're clearly displeased by it,
Yeah.
but we're not repulsed.
We're not repulsed, yeah.
But a bad smell repulses us.
Yeah.
If you have a cat and it's just done its business, you know it's just done its
Yeah.
business. And pardon my crassness here. So there is something so functional about the sense of smell a lot of the time. It tells us about what's dangerous and what's, if something's delicious and all
Yeah.
of these sort of senses. And it helps us navigate the world. And so perhaps it was because art can be so detached from the world of utility and needs and function, you don't need to paint the Sistine Chapel. And again, people might disagree with me in that sense, but smell seems to be just so entangled with everyday practice that we forget.
Yeah.
And I think if you think, well, what is the most artistic medium of smell? Well, you'd say perfume. That's such a commodified market. Yeah. I mean, celebrity fragrances, celebrity endorsements, flashy marketing, and half-naked people. So it just seems that there's a sort of accumulation of not so positive factors or sort of factors that sort of tilt perfume in the wrong direction, that moves it away from the creative process.
Yeah, because it is very closely linked to taste.
Yeah.
Right. But then we will have, a lot of social interactions going out to eat and a lot of pleasure from just cooking at home.
Yeah.
And there is utility in cooking, right? Like it could just be we need sustenance,
yes, of course,
right?
Of course.
Much like how we need to navigate the world through smell. But there is a place for it in society. Food, that is.
Yes.
But other than perfumes, there's really not much by the way of how else we would experience smell other than just day to day and trying to discern the world.
It also seemed to me that the fact that we smell sometimes seems the fact that things smell seem like an almost accidental property of them, if that makes sense.
And not necessarily also complementary, right?
Yeah.
Malaysian durian.
Yes,
yeah?
Of course.
That one really throws people off. It tastes very different to how it smells.
Yeah.
But the smell of it significantly affects the way it tastes, or at least just have going in with that prejudice.
Of course. I mean, smell is taste. I mean, when you chew on food, a process of retronasal olfaction happens where evaporation happens and you're getting aroma molecules pushed into the nose. Yeah.
Tell us about, you'll know more about the science behind these. Smell connected to memory and emotion.
Yeah.
Because that, as far as I know, that is the closest connection that we have in terms of sensation and to elicit.
Yeah. I am of the belief, and again, the classic, I'm not a scientist, I'm a phenomenologist, will emerge here, that the gland, or whatever we might call it, in our brain that's responsible, the nerve, I believe, that's responsible for memory is right next to the one that's responsible for smell, the bulb. So there's that hard scientific fact. When it comes to memory and emotion, the great funny thing about your question is I'm actually arguing in my research that yes, there are of course memory and emotion especially attached to our sense of smell and our imagination to recollect past experiences. Think of the classic scene in Ratatouille where he's eating his mother's food. We all have that experience. Proust and the Madeleine, a little sponge cake dipped into a cup of tea, and all of those memories start flooding back. I actually argue that yes, memories will be triggered and stirred and brewed, but there is something non-memory based in our profound experience of smell that we need to latch onto that is often neglected in the discourse. But I think emotion is so important. I actually think that we orient ourselves in the world through means of pleasure. It's like the compass. And art and creative endeavors is when the compass becomes panicked and frazzled. That is a really good measure for me as to how we know we're doing something that is chaotic.
Yeah, and also just with back to smell and how it is attached to emotions, and that makes it problematic with having a standardized acceptance of what.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, but you were telling me that how you're working on developing standardized smell equals.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I of course belong to a emerging and very amazing tapestry of thinkers and scientists, especially, who are trying to categorize and give a logic to the sense of smell. And again, we still don't know totally how smell works. There are several competing theories, but for example, the idea that molecules vibrate at a certain frequency or rate, and the vibration corresponds to the smell, or the idea that the shape of certain molecules fit in like a lock and a key. So a citrus molecule will have a certain shape, and citrus being, lemon, lime, grapefruit. I fully endorse this idea of a fragrance wheel, the idea that, like a color wheel, there are complementary and contrasting colors. So citrus notes tend to sit on the side of the fresher, aromatic lavender, aquatic smells, marine smells, citrus smells, light florals. And then on the other side, you have the woods and the resins and the incense and the leathers. So there's definitely a logic, and I think it goes back to what we were saying before about the historical prejudice behind smell being one of the lesser senses or mediums. It seems to me that we haven't had a logic for smell until more recently in the world.
Yeah, with color's pretty standardized. Oh well, actually no, I take that back. There's a lot of cultural implications with color.
Yeah.
But I think one of the challenges with smell, much like with taste, is that it changes throughout our life.
Yes.
Yeah, and then even with perfumes, you can, all due respect, you can smell an old lady.
Yes.
Yeah, walking by, they have a very distinct.
Yes.
Yeah, fragrance that they would wear.
Yep, I probably smell like this old lady, mind you. Again, and I think it's because we also have to remember that creative processes. Yeah, sure. They aim towards the transcendental and the timeless. That's great, and I think most art should aim towards this ideal. But they no less come from a tradition, a certain period of time in which meanings are. I was saying before.
That's right.
Certain meanings before were more accepted. So the grandma smell that you politely described, or at least allured to. Whether it's Chanel No. 5, a classic, which is one of my favorite fragrances, with good reason. Classic Jean Patou or Guerlain perfumes, or Caron, whatever takes your fancy. They're creative acts that came from a time in which, jasmine was the privileged ingredient. Joy by Jean Patou, for example, was once the world's most expensive perfume because it had the most amount of jasmine in it. And this was made during the Great Depression because this was just people wanting to differentiate themselves, as I said before. So yes, so nowadays what's popular is amber molecules in a lot of men's perfumes. A lot of men's perfumes smell quite a bit the same to me because they're all sharing the same language.
Yeah,
they're all speaking.
Okay, so it is becoming standardized.
I think there's always been a language. It's just that we haven't been able to translate it.
Yeah, okay. Is there any reason to gender fragrance?
Oh, God, no. My favorite example is one of my signature fragrances is a very old perfume called Jiki, made in 1889, and it just happens to be the oldest perfume still in production today that used the synthetic molecule for the first time. So before 1889, perfumes were just scented waters. So, like, you distill some flower petals and some herbs and some lavender buds, and you splash it on. That's why you get eau de toilette. They're toilet waters, because people were stinky back then, and they didn't have deodorant and proper means of hygiene, so they'd use scented waters. Then along came, in 1889, a perfumer named Aimé Guerlain, who decided to put ethyl vanillin and coumarin, two great synthetic molecules derived from vanilla and tonka bean, respectively, in a perfume to give it an abstract effect. Now, I mention all of this because, to my knowledge, this was first marketed as a men's perfume, and it didn't do so well, so they made it a feminine perfume. Now, I may be mixing this up, but my point still stands. And now it's considered a legendary feminine perfume. Now, whenever people who aren't familiar with who I am go, "Why are you wearing a feminine perfume?" I go, "Did you know that Sean Connery wore this perfume?" And they go, "Oh, in that case, the manliest of men wore it, so I must get the pass in that regard." But yes, the whole gendering of perfume is a very curious undertaking, and it's actually a fairly recent practice, I would say, as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
in the last 50 years?
Yeah, I dare say that. For example, the scent of the Russian imperial courts were violets, and that is a quintessentially, by today's standards, quintessentially feminine smell. But Tsar
Yeah.
Nicholas II wore it, the scent
Yeah.
of violets. So there we go.
What, for branding and commercial purposes?
Well, yeah, for just
Yeah.
the scent of the court.
Oh no, I mean just with the being gendered now. Just for,
Yeah, look, I again, it's just easier
yeah.
for there to be masculine vibes and feminine vibes. And by that, I mean, think of all the masculine ads for masculine perfumes. It's rugged man by the beach or on a motorbike.
Yeah. So we're bringing in different stimulus to form
yeah.
these connections, right? So,
For sure.
you have the smell, the fragrance, and we're going to then bottle it in this sharp, squared
Yes,
bottle
good. Yeah,
with
yeah.
that's got a dark tint to it.
Yeah, nice.
And then that, just by virtue of the other signals that signifies, it is now a masculine perfume.
Yeah.
If it was the same fragrance bottled in something that was more rounded and lighter colors, like whether it be a pink or a peach, it might actually smell different.
Yeah.
Like it actually.
Oh, yes, I know. Well, there's a classic science experiment where people took white wine and dyed it red.
Yeah.
And people thought this was a strong, heavy, big red wine. Yeah, but these very seemingly insignificant factors are quite significant in the end.
Yeah. I think even with when talking about just changing color, I think it was Coke or Pepsi when they removed the caramel color, and it was just
that's right.
a clear, and it bombed.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Now, some brands, and we touched on this when we caught up, brands that are starting to adopt fragrances as part of their brand communication.
Yes.
How much of that do you see coming into play these days?
Yeah, good. I definitely smell it.
Smell it? Yeah.
And then I will mention quickly that we love the visual metaphors because that's the dominant sense for us. But, clearly we've got to shift our modalities and say, I see what you mean, or I feel what you mean. I think we have to start shifting our modalities, our metaphors at least. Now with scent marketing, is there a word for this sort of world of scent marketing? Is it olfactic communication or something like that?
Let's make it up.
Olfactic communication.
Yeah.
So when it comes to olfactic communication, I think of two examples. Apparently, again, science is fed to me through limited readings of journal articles. Mint makes you concentrate more, and figs make you want to buy more things. So when I walk through the supermarket, when I walk through the shopping malls, I smell fig a lot. Quite a lot of fig is tossed around because apparently that produces an environment that makes people want to spend money. But that's what I've been told. But I must admit that I have smelled more figs in supermarket, in shops and boutiques more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can even tie this part back to the phenomenology.
Yes, of
and
course.
having the multi-sensory experiences. Because when I was looking into smell and how it's being used in branding, it was hotels where it's quite prominent.
Of course.
Yeah, and when you're talking about a multi-sensory experience, they want people to feel something, right?
Course,
like in a hotel. Hotels is not just about the way that it's presented.
Yes.
Obviously, that's a big part of it.
Yes.
But there is an underlying feel,
of course,
to your stay that they want you to they want to resonate with you.
Yes.
And having smell attached to that is the sense that is probably going to outlast all the others. And then to attach to that experience.
Yes, no, I like this, and I may have mentioned this when we caught up. Of all the questions that I get about these sort of this sort of world of scent and marketing and memories and associations is, and I think Melburnians will understand, what's that scent of Crown Casino? Everyone's asked me, what is the scent of Crown Casino? And I will tell you now that it's a fragrance by Bulgari called Au Thé Vert, so green tea. So it's this riff on creamy, tea-like, lemony, citrusy. It's tranquil and it's serene and it's calm. And, you know, to be a bit cynical, you may have just lost $1,000 at the roulette table, but you're going to be calm and you know, relaxed.
Is it signature? Is it exclusive to them?
No, I don't think it is.
No?
I think what I would say, actually, I should somewhat clarify. They've clearly used that as an inspiration. There is no doubt to my mind that is the scent. And you can actually now go to the Crown gift shop and buy in a little travel atomizer this room spray. It's bloody hilarious, nice. I will say. But yeah, so 100%. Hotels have a smell. And I think another thing to mention, because this is the infinite transferability of smell, is in little toiletries that you get in the hotel bathrooms.
Yes, of course.
And they often are collaborating with nice fragrance houses. I think Sofitel in London, they stock Hermes products, which is the scent of orange. I think a lot of famous hotels stock niche Le Labo, you know, these sort of smells. So yes, I think scent is an indelible, but also in completely imperative part of one's identity, whether it's an entity or a person, for sure.
Yeah, I want to see more brands being able to utilize smell and more experiences that incorporate smell. And there are a lot. There's certainly a lot. You know, when you're talking, when speaking with Isaiah, when he mentioned, you know, your experience walking through Disneyland.
Yes.
That they've covered all of it. So when you're talking about the sense of touch, things that are tactile, the ground that you're walking on, it feels different. The smell. I'm sure of it that different areas within the theme park will have different smells to elicit different sensations, that, you know, to heighten this excitement or to be a bit more nostalgic.
Yes.
I'm sure they do that. I want to see that being done more with brands, and I think that having a more standardized approach to what smells are, that'll really help culturally.
Yes.
And having us giving a standard of what things this smell equals that, much like how, you know, the color blue will elicit, whether it be just safety and security and stability, red would be excitement, and then, you know, a bit of intrigue, and love. All of these are, they're not universal, but, you know, within the Western culture, we all agree upon them somewhat. But then you throw in the whole notion of counterculture, right? Like, you know, you would wear red ironically. But I don't know if you could ever wear a smell ironically.
That's a great question. That's an amazing question. And I think, well, if you take someone like me who is, as I said, I used the word militant on purpose before about a lot of things, especially the idea of a good smell. If I rocked up in an event wearing a celebrity fragrance, you know, drugstore sort of stuff, I just may well create an ironic effect. There are definitely perfumes out there today that are playing on these sort of ideas. There's a perfume called Not a Perfume, which is just a single molecule that's designed to enhance your pheromones. Again, I don't know what that means exactly, but it's supposed to amplify your own smell. And there's a perfume, very vulgar, called Sécrétion Magnifique, and it's the scent of all your bodily functions in a bottle, so not very pleasant to smell. So there are perfumes that are designed to, or have been purposefully designed to make a statement, whether it's loud or quiet. But I think we have to accept, if we're going to treat perfume as an artistic medium, that there will also be aesthetic effects attached to them.
Of course.
Irony is one, enigmaticness is another one, etc., etc.
Yeah, but then there will be, let's say, in the world of art, you could be intentionally offensive,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
You can be intentionally offensive,
Of course, of
with
course.
fragrance as well, but to your detriment.
yes,
really.
of course, of course. Yes, I agree.
I mentioned to you that when I was younger, I had synesthesia. I didn't
Yes,
realize
yes.
that until later in my 20s, I think it was, when I heard about it. And it was like, hang on a minute. When I think it was another artist was discussing how they attached numbers and colors.
Yes, yes.
And it just took me back to when I had that. I connected that.
That's right. Yes.
And
yes.
you were telling me that you see smells, right? You can form shapes.
I tend to visualize smells, probably because scent for me exists in space, but it also exists in time. And scent is just evaporation. And the best composed perfumes are the ones that they're like a symphony. They have parts essentially. Some might be a cute little piano piece, and some might be a full blown romanticist symphony. Whatever, be that as it may, or whatever it may be, I do tend to see color in almost like a prism of sort of like, it'll start as red and then end up as sort of a hollow yellow color or something like that. So that's the sort of way that I visualize scent, as a sort of 3D prism. I wish I could be more clear as to what it is. It is essentially the analog for all of this is that it's a feeling, it's a pleasure, and I can sort of visualize this pleasure, and I can then use that to inform the way that I engage with the world of scent.
So that being said, that you could also you could reverse engineer that, and you could create your smells based on things that you see.
Yeah. There have definitely been perfumers that in interviews that have, smelt essential oils and have seen them as vertical lines of ink like black or something, and then created in their heads olfactory artworks within the visual metaphor, and then through smell. And you can definitely, I think, reverse engineer it and render what I see into scent and things like that.
Jeez, man, this is giving me an idea. So you could even have like let's say an exhibition that's showcasing work and having a smell to complement that work.
Yes. Well, it's happened before.
Yeah.
A really good perfumer that I engage with, he's from America, Bruno Fazzolari, is a professor in art, and became a perfumer only because he was doing his beautiful, very colourful and dramatic works, visual works, paintings, and then then he was scenting the room of the exhibition with a certain smell that matches what he was seeing, or what you're seeing. So yes, there is definitely a more modern movement in which these two dimensions are merged together.
But
That's for sure.
definitely merging together, but also then just changing up how the artwork is perceived.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of
So
course.
instead of having a smell that suggests this is what you're smelling, what you see, it could be done in a way that it is complementary or to enhance.
Yeah, for sure.
That, right. So if you're talking, back again to having that multi-sensory experience, we are going to shift the way that you perceive this visual artwork
Yes.
by affecting your sense of
Yeah,
smell.
yeah. There have been, in America and Europe especially, scent dinners where, a brand, let's just take for the case of argument, Gucci, picks 5 of their fragrances, and then a chef will then pick apart the notes in those fragrances and then make dishes to complement, or at least to recreate this scent in food. It's incredible.
I love that.
Yeah, really
love
incredible, really. And then, of course, they'll spray the fragrance as you tuck into your first course,
Yeah.
and that'll amplify and extend the experience as well.
Yeah. I saw this, it was on MasterChef years back. I'm not sure if they still do this challenge where they blindfolded.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and had to get them to pick what it was that they were eating.
Yes.
And even just, when we mention how closely related smell and taste is, but visual, right? And then when you have a chef like Heston who would
Yes.
create something that, let's say he had this one dish was the chicken pate
Oh,
In,
in the clementine or orange. Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
the one that I'm familiar with is cherries, but yeah,
Oh,
same
and
same thing,
cherries.
same
Okay.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's an orange, but then so you're having this savory, salty taste, but visually what you're seeing is
Yes.
something that's
Yeah,
meant to
yeah,
be
yeah.
sweet and bitter, and that just have you ever had anything like that?
I
Because that messes with
I've
me, man.
been to the restaurant. I was very fortunate to go when he was in Melbourne
Yeah.
for about a year or so, and I had the meat fruit. So it was the orange or the
Yeah. Okay.
mandarin
Yeah.
in the with the chicken liver parfait, enrobed in the mandarin jelly.
How much did that just mess with you?
I loved it.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and yeah, it was amazing because even from up close, I was imagining myself able to decipher it in the sense that I was able to go, oh, that is clearly not an orange, but it looked very convincing. I love this example because Heston is inspired by a lot of history, and there was, and historically, savory meats were often paired with sweet fruits because they were all luxurious items. So, what I love is that in many ways, Heston is engaging in a creative process, but he's relying on the lessons of history in order to develop that. And what's changed is essentially science. What's possible through new technique. I love this actually because in my final year of my undergraduate, I did a lot of cultural studies and cultural sociology. And my final essay was this very idea of the logic in which how we get from pate, which is just a forced meat of, crushed up livers and all those yummy things, moving into meat fruit. And I wanted to explore the logic in which that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's art.
It is art, yes, for sure. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's an amazing, it was an amazing revolution in what we would call molecular cuisine. Yeah.
Molecular cuisine.
Yeah. Just the possibilities of using things like jellification, spherification, all these new molecules that the power of science has allowed us to
Man.
do. Yeah.
Textures is a big one when it comes
It's a massive one, yes. And it's funny because in the 1940s, in Italy, there was a movement called Futurism, which was obsessed with speed and progress and travel. So trains were a big motif. And they basically were doing this in the 1940s, in which they were saying things like, I'm trying to think of a good example. They would make sculptures made out of meat and drizzled in honey, and you're only allowed to, you have to eat it blindfolded, with your hands or something. Or a really good example is they would put you on a fake plane, and then they would feed you whilst you're on this plane, and just this it's the multi-sensory triggering.
Yeah.
Again, it's often it was back then the avant-gardes, Artusi, not Artusi, pardon me, Marinetti, the famous futurist, who was like, we have to push the boundaries, and and it had a political agenda underneath it. We have to embrace a culture that's forward-thinking and progressive and willing to take up a challenge, and now it's semi-standardized with people like Heston Blumenthal.
Yeah. Where's you're concluding your PhD by the end of this year? Actually, not end of this year. Sorry, we are at the end of this year.
We are. I am hopefully finishing up by the middle of next year.
And then, where do you see yourself, and where do you see taking your learnings and then putting it back out in the world?
Yeah. Look, I would say one of the hunches I have about the direction of my research is turning what I call a sublime experience into essentially what we would call a pedagogy, a method of teaching. Because the sublime, by my lights, is about the expansion or the revelation of different aspects and dimensions of the human subject, that can turn into something of a method, and I use that word, a manner, I should actually say, in which we can use to guide education. Because if I argue in the sublime that thought is oriented by forms of pleasure, and all thought has to have a sense of affective, like a vibration or something like that, and the sublime is when it's confused and confounded and frazzled, then we can take these lessons and say that we should educate people along the lines of pleasure in a sophisticated sense. Because pleasure can be mistaken. I'm not saying that it's always right. There are bad pleasures, what's the famous, drug, sex, and rock and roll. These are all bad, and sugar. All of these are bad, and all of these are bad pleasures, in moderation, one might say. But I definitely feel like I want to develop this idea that we can lean on the sublime as a manner for education, that we can educate ourselves to be more attuned to this sort of feeling, and that can guide forms of education. The sublime can teach us about the world. Again, it necessarily involves the sense in which how we understand something in a solidified way comes to break down, and then we can see the world as an empty nothingness, if to use a slightly dramatic phrasing, because when the world is vacated of what is solid, possibility becomes endless. One of the leading metaphors in my work is that we should learn to see the world like an infant again, because it's the world prior to categorization. Now, the idea is that because the infant has no concepts, they see pure matter, they see pure content.
Yeah.
And the sublime is the stripping away of the strings that hold the world together.
Yeah.
And that's the phenomenological aspect as well. It's the idea of, you look at the world and fireworks start. Instead of the nausea I mentioned before, it's now fireworks. We're seeing the world loosened of its strings, and it's exciting and fresh and novel. And within that is where possibility is born. In the infinite, we as you mentioned, we don't know the infinite. We merely have a word to denote what it is, but we can certainly feel it, and we can certainly approximate it, and that is one of the greatest lessons of the sublime there is.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. We do lose touch with a lot of things as you get older. Like with the knowledge and the experience. Ironically, does stunt us in many ways.
Yes, of course.
As well.
Of course. There's a great example in poetical theory by a really great poet, Paul Valéry, and it's called Man and the Seashell. It's almost a tongue twister. Man and the Seashell. And it's just a man walking along the beach, and he picks up a seashell with a nice sort of curved, sort of spiral shape. And he sort of says, well, there's two things we can do. We can study it and stare at it and imagine, almost with a mathematical attitude, we can sort of dissect what it is. Or we can accept that nature produced this object in the beautiful randomness that nature is, and we're just letting it be as it is. And I think that is part of that pedagogy I was talking about, that you just have to let things emerge and bloom.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that really does. There's tension between that and our hunger just to know everything.
Yeah. So in my work, there's the distinction between the functionalized attitude, the functional imagination that wants to form patterns. So that's the job of the imagination, and the more figural, the one that's metaphoric, and all of those sort of ideas. Yeah.
Dude, this has been great. There's a lot to sit on with this one.
Yes, there is. It's always at the end that the one comes up with the sort of the vexation. But I feel with my research that I've been able to effectively bring together a history in my cultural studies, and as well as a deep love of aesthetics, and see how the sublime helps us approach the world in a creative fashion, to then be able to not only understand it, because that's the order of logic, but to appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just accept it is what it is, and to embrace it, really.
Yeah. And I don't want that to suggest an inactivity, a sort of just, being a pacifist. I don't think the sublime is life-affirming. It's the will to live. And because people will often twist the sublime, and many have, as this paralyzing force. And of course, I understand that when the idea of looking at a volcano erupting, you feel like an ant, drifting in the infinite cosmos, and that's fine. Or maybe it isn't, I don't know. But you no less feel empowered to do something. And that's the creative impulse, I would say.
Yeah, this takes me to a conversation I just had with a friend of mine last week about how the more that we know, the smaller we become.
Yes,
right.
yeah,
You know, when you're talking about, you know, when we were just cavemen or real primitive, we only knew our immediate surroundings. We didn't venture beyond the plains.
yes,
And then we did.
yes.
And then, you know, we've migrated all around the world. Okay. And then, you know,
Yes,
and then we thought that the sun was.
the Copernican revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the more we know, the smaller we become relatively. And as you were saying, something like that could be quite paralyzing.
Oh, yes, for sure.
But on the other side of that, it could feel paralyzing, or it could be like it just gives us the freedom to do anything because it really doesn't matter so much.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with this reading. Yeah, I think that was the impulse for my research. Just reading these sublime analyses where people were talking about being paralyzed, and I go, but you see, I experience an amazing perfume to keep it thematic, and I feel inspired, and I think that's the word as well. Inspiration. It's intermittent. It's rare. It's privileged, but it's definitely there. Yeah.
Where can people read more about some of the things that you've put out, your papers?
Yeah.
Where can they find you and reach out to you if they have questions?
I guess, look, if anyone wants to reach out, definitely reach out via my website, liamsardea.com, just my name. No one else has my name, so it's quite useful. Instagram is king in terms of social media. We all know this. So one being me, has had to sort of understand that, you know, one's business card is now their Instagram page. That's how it works nowadays. I must admit that a lot of my thoughts in this field have been primarily reserved to my academic writing, which is at this point draft. It's unpublished. But there is a slew of writings, whether it's my perfume reviews, my general discussions about culture, throughout the internet and also on my website, that definitely have the sublime lens applied to them.
Awesome.
The very practical, programmatic stuff will come in the form of a PhD.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah.
Throughout. Yeah, that's you've put it out there. Man, thank you so much, dude. That was a lot of fun. It helps broaden my thinking, and I'm sure that whoever gets their ears onto this one will appreciate that there is so much more than, I want to say, meets the eye.
Yes, no,
But,
yes. Yes. Look, if I may add a little concluding remark, the sublime is about the imagination in free play, unconstrained by anything, or everything rather. Or unconstrained, full stop. And I think if we understand that this does happen to us, but sometimes we don't get to choose when it happens, that becomes the basic sort of reference point to what we might call creative impulses, you know, all of these sort of really fantastic ideas. So the sublime is amazing, and the world is filled with the beautiful, and that's great. I think the beautiful is restful. And it's good to be agitated and stirred here and there. So I believe passionately that it's the sublime that gets us in that direction.
Yeah. That's nice, man.
Thank you.